Hey everybody, this week I'm again coming at you with some travel thoughts. If you haven't heard, I'm doing a bit of a series on 2 different books that I read and wanted to share with you. Today I'm focusing on The Art of Travel by Alain de Botton. Today's topic is about places that attract us and what impact they have on us. Last week I mentioned about nature versus cities and how these moments of nature that we hold in our memory kind of act as an antidote for the anxiousness that cities may cause us. Today I'm going to take this a little bit of a step further with some excerpts from that same book that I was talking about last time, The Art of Travel. So I want to start this by talking about how sublime landscapes, which you can think of maybe endless horizons, a beautiful sunset, maybe a vast desert, or high mountains, things like this that remind us of our place in the world and how it does so very graciously. I'm going to start with my first excerpt. Here goes. Even when we are not in deserts, the behavior of others and our own flaws are prone to leave us feeling small. Humiliation is a perpetual risk in the world of men. It is not unusual for our will to be defied and our wishes frustrated. Sublime landscapes do not therefore introduce us to our own inadequacy. Rather, to touch on the crux of their appeal, they allow us to conceive of a familiar inadequacy in a new and more helpful way. Sublime places repeat in grand terms a lesson that ordinary life typically introduces viciously, that the universe is mightier than we are, that we are frail and temporary and have no alternative but to accept limitations on our will, that we must bow to necessities greater than ourselves. This is the lesson written into the stones of the desert and the ice fields of the poles. So grandly it is written there that we may come away from such places not crushed, but inspired by what lies beyond us, privileged to be subject to such majestic necessities. The sense of awe may even shade into a desire to worship. Here, the main idea is these sublime places he talks about in the universe basically just being way bigger than we are. In some ways, it may sound negative, but the point here is to remind ourselves that some things will always be beyond our control. Think of it, if there's a hurricane, can you stop that hurricane with your own hands? No, you can't. That's life. What he means to say is that sometimes to fight these bad things that happen to us, which is often our reaction to try and fight, can usually cause us needless mental struggle. Whenever I have come across landscapes that are sublime, I do not think of this per se. However, the thought that comes into my mind is usually this: I am so small in this massive world. But it's not a feeling of sadness. I'm actually more feeling inspired, and I crave to continue walking and pushing myself to get to greater heights. I can't explain to you specifically how I feel this way. Perhaps that's just what de Botton argues, is that it just might be part of his reasoning. I don't know, but that's how I feel, that it brings this feeling of being small, but in a positive way, which is definitely what he's alluding to here, which I find really interesting. Another really interesting thing that I found in this chapter is about the ability of these sublime landscapes to replace religious practices. And you may have noticed in the last excerpt, he actually alluded to that. He said, the sense of awe may even shade into a desire to worship, which brings me to my next excerpt, which he says, it is no coincidence that the Western attraction to sublime landscapes developed at precisely the moment when traditional beliefs in God begin to wane. It is as if these landscapes allowed travelers to experience transcendent feelings that they no longer felt in cities and the cultivated countryside. The landscapes offered them an emotional connection to a greater power, even as they freed them of the need to subscribe to the more specific and now less plausible claims of biblical text and organized religions. The link between God and sublime landscapes is made most explicit in one book of the Bible. The circumstances are peculiar. God is asked by a righteous but desperate man to explain why his life has become full of suffering. And God answers him by bidding him to contemplate the deserts and the mountains, rivers and ice caps, oceans and skies. Seldom have sublime places been asked to bear the burden of such a weighty, urgent question. So why did I highlight this? The one book in the Bible that he's referring to is the book of Job, but this isn't a Bible study video. If you want to know more about that biblical story, please look it up. Basically, the focus here is on transcendence. Now, this is something that maybe also applicable to us, because I know for sure I can relate to that. That feeling of I'm so small that I just talked about parallels with transcendence, in my opinion. When I was in Nepal, I was volunteering with a girl who had just spent over a month trekking in the Annapurnas and also Manaslu Mountain. And she was giving me advice on which trek to decide on for myself, because I hadn't done any trekking yet. And she warned me, once you get out there, you won't want to leave. I became addicted to the mountains, because what she ended up doing was doing a trek in Manaslu, continued on to the circuit, and then she was like, no, that's not enough. And then she also went out to Annapurna Base Camp. So she did several things without really planning to do it because she felt this addiction. Now, obviously, she too had this unquenchable thirst for sublime landscapes. That's very obvious. As I speak to many other friends my age, I noticed that very few are religiously active. I'm thinking those who actually regularly attend church, but how a really good chunk of them find great joy in traveling to these kinds of places that both I know I'm addicted to, like my friend in Nepal. I'm going to finish off with this last excerpt that hopefully a lot of other nature-loving travelers out there will also relate to and enjoy. So here we're talking about the influence and the craving for sublime landscapes and places, and how it might be more meaningful than how we previously thought. If the world seems unfair or beyond our understanding, sublime places suggest that it is not surprising that things should be thus. We are the playthings of the forces that laid out the oceans and chiseled the mountains. Sublime places gently move us to acknowledge limitations that we might otherwise encounter with anxiety or anger in the ordinary flow of events. It is not just nature that defies us. Human life is as overwhelming, but it's the vast spaces of nature that perhaps provide us with the finest, the most respectful reminder of all that exceeds us. If we spend time in them, they may help us to accept more graciously the great, unfathomable events that molest our lives and will inevitably return us to dust. Whoa, right? I don't know. I feel whoa when I read that. Basically, to sum up this video, these sublime places act as a way to help us accept all the annoying, the painful things we can't understand or come to terms with, all these situations that bring us anxiety or anger. And seeing these places, we somehow come to accept it, maybe. I don't know if we do that really consciously, but maybe unconsciously we do, because like I said, when I think back to these times where I've been in these sublime places, it just brings about this feeling of, I'm so small, everything is so big, that is okay. It somehow becomes natural and okay. And I think that has to be the great power of these sublime landscapes that Alain de Botton is also writing about. So that's what I came here to share with you today. If you have any extra thoughts about what I've just talked about, please let me know in the comments. I do find it really interesting and I would love to discuss it further with you. If you like this video, please like it. Stay tuned for next week because I'm going to be continuing these discussions about travel and these different themes. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching and sticking around with me, and I will see you next week. Bye.